afternoon. As a way of introduction, my name is Matt Weimer. I'm Director of Strategic Solutions here with Diversified. A couple of housekeeping things before we get into it, and I do the intro of our main presenter. If you do have questions, we'd ask that you type it in the chat section on your control panel. Throughout the presentation, we'll be addressing those at the end of the presentation. Everyone is in listen-only mode, so you don't have to worry about inadvertently speaking to anybody. Everybody is in listen-only mode. We'll keep it that way just so we can keep on our 45-minute time frame that we're to achieve here. So again, if you do have questions, feel free to type them in the chat box along the way, and we'll answer them at the end. We also are recording this session, so we will be sending out at the end of the presentation within the next couple of days here a copy of the webinar for everyone as well. So without further ado, I'm going to actually go ahead and present our presenter today. David Farrell is a sales leader with Paycor, located out of Downers Grove, Illinois. David's career has been focused on working with businesses to improve their hire-to-retire process. Obviously, it's important to us and what we do with employer solutions, and have partnered with Paycor as one of our partners to help provide these solutions. David has worked with companies as small as 1 to as large as 10,000, and similar to what our process is, Paycor follows the same process, and finding efficiencies, eliminating risk, engage employees in a better way, and that's why we're excited to not only be working with Paycor on a continual basis, but also to have Paycor presenting our presentation today on the Department of Labor proposed overtime updates. So without further ado, I'm actually going to turn it over to David Farrell, and he'll walk us through the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, Matt. Can you confirm that you guys can hear me out there? Matt, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Oh, okay, I got you. Thanks so much. I got instantly petrified. So that's an awesome way to start a presentation. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Farrell. As Matt mentioned, I'm the Regional Sales Director for Paycor, effectively here in Chicago, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. And I would say, kudos to you for taking the time to learn about a piece of legislation that's going to impact a large number of you. And the way that we're really looking at this Department of Labor proposed change is it's conceivably the new ACA. There's going to be a lot more reporting that's required on your part. There's going to be a lot more due diligence. You're going to have to track some things that you're probably not accustomed to tracking. And good for you for getting a head start on it. We've been talking about it here between Diversified and Paycor. We've been talking about this for probably 4 or 5 months. So what we're going to do today is spend some time on what the heck is this whole Department of Labor proposed change? What does it mean for your organization? Potentially, how does it apply to you? And then also at the end, take some Q&A. So with everything in this world, there's a legal disclaimer. So the information in this presentation is not intended to be legal advice. I am not an attorney, and I'm not a certified public accountant. So that doesn't mean I'm not qualified to speak about this. But quite simply, it means that if you have a very specific scenario to your business that could create liability for you or for an employee, the best advice is always to talk to a subject matter expert and probably get some legal counsel on it. I would also tell you that this law is proposed at this point, and it's subject to change. So if you think back to the ACA, I remember talking about ACA, 6 years ago, 7 years ago when they first came out with it, and all of the different sort of rumors about what would and what wouldn't constitute it and how it was going to work. We're going through a little bit of that right now with this DOL legislation. It's subject to change, so the information that you get today could change in 3 or 4 weeks. And so I would encourage you to find some trusted resources like Diversified and make sure that you've got somebody in your corner to help you from a continuing education standpoint. So what is this proposed Department of Labor change? Well, effectively, what's going on is the Department of Labor has proposed an increase to the threshold of salary needed to qualify for the white-collar exemption. So effectively, the white-collar exemption states that if you are a salaried employee and you currently make more than $23,600 per year, you are not eligible for overtime. So I know that, that with my salary and the fact that I'm an outside salesperson, I'm not eligible for overtime. So if you look at your employees that earn $23,600 per year, they are eligible now, when this law goes through, to earn potential overtime. So the employees that you really want to look for are those making $23,600 per year up to $50,400. So the proposed change is this: if you have a salaried employee and they make between $23,600 per year and $50,400, you're going to have to increase their pay to at least $50,440 per year. Sorry, there's a typo here. So the employees that make between $23,600 and $50,440, these are the employees affected by this Department of Labor change. So effectively, the why behind it is because the Department of Labor has frozen that white-collar exception number at $23,600. That's been the number for many years. And if you have a salaried employee that has a family of 4 and they're making $23,600 per year, they're actually living below the federal poverty line. And so this is the government's way of increasing their pay. And if you go to the Department of Labor website, they actually have a really well put together website about fair days pay for fair days work. So the Department of Labor is spending a lot of money to ensure that this proposed change goes through. And I would tell you that right now it's proposed, and there's going to be a change from a presidential standpoint, and it's our council's opinion that this law is going to go through. Now, when it goes through and what the final dollar amount actually is, I think those are the two variables right now. But this is going to happen. The best employers that we know are already planning for it. And again, we've got a lot of people on the line today that are at least learning about this and planning on taking some steps. And that's my advice to you, is understand how this impacts your business, understand who it impacts, and then do some research so that you can make the right decisions when this thing goes into effect. So right now, it's our understanding that this could go into effect as early as Q2, but probably later Q3. So anywhere from September to October. I can't tell you the month, but I can tell you the year. It's going to happen in 2016. It's the current president's one of his projects that he wants to get done before he leaves office. And so again, this is not an if this is going to happen. This is a when it's going to happen. So under the proposed law, any salaried exempt employee who earns under $50,440 will need to be paid overtime for any additional hours above 40 per week. So what you're looking for is you're looking for employees that earn between $23,600 and $50,440 and that are working overtime. Those are the employees that are going to be affected. So the reason why this is really going to have a heavy impact on employers is, first of all, you need to understand what your employees are working. Because if you have a $40,000 per year employee, and under this new legislation, you're going to have to pay them for overtime, right? Salary doesn't matter anymore. I've got to pay somebody overtime, time and a half, 1 hour per week on a $40,000 per year employee equals $1,500. So that's probably an expense that you're not exactly planning for at this point. And I would hate to have to walk into my CFO and say, hey, we didn't understand this legislation, and in order to not get fined and penalized by the Department of Labor, we now have to pay these 15 people time and a half for all the hours that they worked, even though they're salaried. And by the way, that's going to cost us $1,500 per employee. So one of the first things that you're going to want to do is to understand the hours that your salaried employees are working. So if you don't already have a time and attendance solution in place, it's our advice that you find some sort of way, preferably electronically, to start tracking your salaried employees' work hours. So again, anyone that's making between $23,600 and $50,440, you need to understand what sort of hours that they're working. What we find is this is really heavily going to impact the nonprofit industry. Because if you think about it, most people work in a nonprofit not because of the glitz and the glamour and the high base salaries, but because they believe in the mission of the nonprofit. And so most nonprofits don't exactly pay, six-figure salaries to everybody. So, we have a couple, well, actually 25% of our client base is nonprofit. And I have someone that I work with that works with United Way and is in charge of United Way payroll in Cincinnati. And they found 8 employees that were affected by this change. And those 8 employees are not making a big chunk of change, and they're definitely working more than 40 hours per week. So you do not want to approximate your employees' hours. You need to understand the hours that they're working. So if Bob's salary, I'll give you a quick example, is $40,000 per year, and you keep him at $40,000 per year because he's below that $50,440 threshold, you're now going to have to pay him time and a half for the 10 hours he works per week. So first 40 hours are at straight time, effectively. That's part of his salary. But those extra 10 hours per week now, I now have to pay him time and a half. So for someone in Bob's scenario, his new pay, if everything stays the same and I just simply comply with the legislation and pay him time and a half, is going to be $54,991. So there's going to be some math involved in this. It's not as easy. First of all, I don't know a lot of employers that can just automatically give people raises, and that's certainly part of it. You could give everybody a raise to $50,440, and then you don't have to worry about overtime for them anymore. But that can be a really costly decision for an employer. So again, you want to understand what hours is Bob working, because he falls within that range, 23 to the 50 range here, and he's working overtime. So understanding your salaried employee's hours, very important. If Bob earns $45,000 per year and he works 44 hours a week, his new estimated annual pay is $51,700. If he earns $30K per year and works 40 hours a week, it's $38,900. If he's making $40K a year and works 50 hours a week, he's making $55,000. And if you've got somebody, extreme example, I know, but again, think about those employees that just work their tails off because they have to, and their salary is really low, a $35,000 a year person working 60 hours per week, their new compensation could be as high as $61,200. So understand the hours that your employees are working is my #1 recommendation. Understand which employees are vulnerable or which employees are applicable, and then understand the hours that they're working. So you need a plan, right? So what does it mean to an organization today? We at Paycor, we have about 30,000 clients nationwide. And so what we did is we ran the numbers through our solution and found that 65% of our employers have at least one employee on their payroll that would be affected by this. So, when the ACA came out, the ACA talked about applicable large employers and employers with more than 50 or more than 100 employees. And so a certain subset of clients and businesses in the United States sort of wiped the sweat off their brow and said, oh, we're okay, it doesn't apply to us. The size of your business doesn't matter. So if you're a 2-employee business and one of your employees earns $30,000 per year in salary and they're working 60 hours a week, you're going to have to make a decision on how you compensate that employee or face a Department of Labor violation. So 65% of our employers are affected, and on average, we found that 8 employees per business were affected. So, and It's a big number. It's something that, again, is not going away, and you're going to need to take the time to understand how it impacts your organization. So my best advice for things that you can start doing today is, again, number one, determine if you're affected. Number two, understand which of your employees are affected. And then number three, determine the amount of hours that those employees work and start tracking their hours now. And the reason why that's important is because there are different options that you have on how you compensate that employee. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But there are different options on how you pay them. And so when you go to make that decision, do you want to make that decision based off of intuition, off of instinct, or do you want to base it off of financial data and facts and figures that are in front of you? And so if you can start having those affected salaried employees punch in and punch out on a time and attendance system, then when this thing comes to bear in July or September, October, right, you can say, well, we know exactly the hours, we know what David makes, and we know exactly the hours that David is working, and so this is the decision we're going to make about David. And the decision per employee is going to be different. And guys, you do not want to guess on stuff like this, because guessing and estimating could cost your business a good chunk of change. So we have a solution, and this is not a commercial, but whatever solution you use, you're going to want to run some sort of report that shows you any salaried employees that are earning less than $50,440. So that's going to allow us to understand which of our employees are affected by this change at the end of the year, right? And an example of the information that you're going to want to know in that report, things like the employee's name, their annualized salary. If we're tracking their hours, then we're going to want to know what sort of hours that employee is working. We're also going to want to know, if I took that $40,000 salary and I divided it by 52, what is that employee's weekly rate? We're also going to want to understand, what is that employee's hourly rate? We're also going to want to know, if I have to pay them overtime, what's my overtime rate? And then, are they affected, yes or no? So if I take a look at this report here, I can see right off the bat I've got 3 or 4, actually a lot more than that, employees that I'm going to have to make some decisions on, and I've got the information at hand. So you're going to want to start tracking and managing your employee hours. Now, here's what I would tell you. A lot of you are already doing this. A good chunk of businesses out there have some sort of way of tracking employee hours, because the majority of businesses have a mix of salary employees and hourly employees. And so your hourly workforce, they are already punching in and punching out, and this doesn't apply to them, right? Because they're earning overtime anyway. At least they should be, right? So we want to comply with Department of Labor regulations. That's the whole reason we're talking about this. But now you're going to have your salaried employees punching in and punching out. So you'll want to understand what sort of hours and activity my salaried employees have, and then you're also going to want to know who's working overtime. So you're going to want, whatever system you're using, you're going to want to pull that data out of it. If you're tracking your time and attendance manually right now, you're going to have to do a lot of work in Excel, and I would tell you that it's going to be, anytime I see somebody tracking time manually, that's a very reactive way to managing employee time. You're going to want to automate that in some way, shape, or form so that you can have instant sort of real-time access to the data. So let's talk a little bit about what you should be planning for over the next couple months. So the proposed update, again, it's supposed to be put into law early to late 2016. I would say at this point it's looking more like Q2 to Q3. So in addition to planning, what should you be planning for, right? And so I would say, first, consider the options and do the math. So let's talk about that for a second, right? There are options that you have when it comes to paying these people and paying them correctly, because I don't know, we don't know exactly what the consequences are for not doing this correctly. But what I would tell you is traditionally, Department of Labor fines, if you pay somebody less than minimum wage, for example, traditionally you need to almost double the money that you should have paid the employee. That's what you're going to pay in restitution and fines and penalties to the Department of Labor. So it's going to be more costly to do nothing and not comply than it is to comply, right? And so, and don't wait until you get nailed. There are a number of ways that you can get caught. First of all, if you go into your, I have an iPhone, right? So if I go into my app store, there's actually a mobile app from the Wage and Hour Division of the government. And the mobile app is something that I can download for free, where I can, using the government's app, I can record my time to the punch. So I show up at work today at 7:30, I punch in, right? I leave work today at 5:30, I punch out. So I can track my time in attendance. And then if I were so inclined, I can actually send that timesheet to the government to verify that I'm being paid properly by my employer. So the risk of getting caught is pretty big here. And I always advise people just to play it safe. It's cheaper to play it safe. And, you know, while you might have a smaller workforce in everybody's family, as soon as people find out that they're not getting paid according to what they should be getting paid, the family stuff goes out the window, right? When you lay somebody off, they're going to go to the state unemployment office and they're going to file an unemployment claim, and that could trigger an audit into your business. You know, I go out to dinner with my friends this weekend, and one of my friends tells me, hey, I just got this really cool raise at work because I was salaried and now I need to either earn overtime or they bumped me up to $50,440. And I'm going, huh? What are you talking about? What raise? And then I find out that my employer didn't make the same decision. So it's very easy for you to get caught here. It's going to be a big issue that's very public. And so, so there's 4 things that you can do, right? 1, you can do nothing. So you can keep that salaried employee at their $30,000 rate of pay and then pay them time and a half for the hours that they're working. So they're going to have to punch in and punch out, even though they're salaried, because you're going to need to pay them overtime, and it has to be accurate. So if we go back to that, you know, extreme example of an employee making $35,000 and they're working 60 hours per week, their new annualized pay is around $62,000. So option 1, do nothing, right? But ensure that you're still paying them time and a half. Option 2, you can move that salaried employee to an hourly rate and adjust the hourly rate based on the hours that the employee typically works. That, to me, is going to be a sticky conversation. I don't know how many people we have that are in HR on the phone, but I would tell you that people do tend to take a certain amount of pride in being a salaried employee. I know I haven't been an hourly employee since I was in college, and if my employer came in and said, hey, we're going to make you hourly, that might not sit too well with employees. So I think that's going to be a really sticky conversation to have, but it might be absolutely necessary based on the financials of it. Third option, you can just bump people's salaries to $50,440. And so take a look at all of your affected employees and decide, of those, I have to give out raises now. Now look, that's another sticky situation, because let's say that I have 10 people on my floor here that report to me, and for whatever reason I have 5 that are under $50,440, and I have 5 that are at $50,100, or let's call it $51,000. So I'm going to bring in 5 people, and I'm going to give them all raises, right? I'm going to take them from whatever they're at now to $50,440, based solely on the hours that they work, not based anywhere near some sort of financial measure or performance reviews, right? Well, how do I explain that to the other 5 employees that are maybe doing as good or better jobs, and they're not getting raises? So that's another sticky part about number 3 is you're going to give a certain subset of your employees a raise to comply with this, conceivably, and the group of employees that doesn't get a raise, they're probably not going to be real thrilled about that, right? And then the last option that you really have is you can mandate that they work no overtime and then manage it profusely, right? So you can say, I'm going to keep your salary the same, but now you're not allowed to work overtime. So let's think about what impact that has on my business. That employee that's working overtime is typically working overtime because it's required to get the job done. And so if I say that that Tim can no longer work overtime, and I lose 20 hours of Tim's work week, I'm going to have to replace those hours from somebody else. So I'm either going to have to work with some sort of scheduling tool, or I'm potentially going to go out and have to hire a new part-time employee to help take on the responsibility, because I still have to get the job done. So every option here has a consequence, and the consequence is not just payroll related. So making these changes is going to touch things like job descriptions. When I post a job description out to a careers website, that job description is now going to have to list, well, first of all, it does anyway, right? But job descriptions that previously were salaried, non-exempt from overtime, could now be salaried and earning overtime, right? Potentially, I'm going to have to change the job description. If I'm going to mandate that that position is not eligible for overtime, I'm going to have to indicate that in my job description. So not only does it hit job descriptions, it hits your employee classifications, which touches your HR tool, which touches your HR department. Another way that that touches my HR department is that stuff's going to need to start showing up in my handbook. So I'm going to have to notify people that if they make between these these ranges, or if they make less than $50,440 as a salary, they're now eligible for overtime. And in my handbook, it's going to have to explain that, and it's also going to have to ask them and require them to punch in and punch out so that I can properly pay them their overtime. The other way that that affects my HR department is because that could hit discipline and discharge. So when you think about it, if I have a salaried employee that is refusing to punch in and punch out, I'm going to have a conversation about that with them. And if they continue to refuse it and they go into a discipline process and I end up having to let them go, you're going to need to document that, right? You can never document too much when it comes to employee conversations. And let's say that I'm mandating that they can't work overtime. Well, that's going to have to be in my handbook too. And I'm going to have to make sure that if an employee starts to work overtime, I'm going to have to bring them in and have a conversation with them about not working overtime. And conceivably, that hits my discipline process. So, initially when I heard about this, I immediately just thought about payroll. I just thought about people's rates of pay and the different options that people had. But when you start pulling the string on the sweater, again, it's going to hit your recruiting department from a job description standpoint. It's going to hit your HR department from employee classification codes, from your handbooks, from your discipline process. It's going to hit your time and attendance, because now employees that traditionally were not punching in and punching out are now going to be required to punch in and punch out because you have to comply with the Department of Labor change. And it's obviously going to hit payroll from a wage standpoint. So let's look at a couple different options. So the most cost-neutral option is really going to be option number 2, which is effectively changing the employees from a salaried employee to an hourly rate employee. So this is where it gets a little sticky and the math can be tricky. So let's say that Bob makes $40,000 per year, but he works 50 or 60 hours, sorry, let's stick with 50. Let's stick with 50. 50 hours per week. So how do you calculate his new rate of pay? So Bob's currently weekly pay at 40 hours per week is $40,000 divided by 52, right? That's going to give us $769.23. In order to get Bob's new hourly rate equal to his current salary level, you have to factor in his weekly overtime hours. And so, I didn't promise you that there wouldn't be math here, right? We're going to have to take his weekly pay is going to equal his overtime hours times time and a half of his new hourly rate plus his 40 hours times his new hourly rate. So in this example, that's 769 equals 10 times 1.5 plus 40 times his new hourly rate. So we've got X here. So $769.23 divided by effectively 55 hours means that his new rate is $13.99 effectively. So cost neutral means that if he continues to work 55 hours and I paid him at $13.99 per hour, Bob would make $40,000. And that's completely legal because I'm paying him for his time and a half. So you're going to need to understand the hours that these people are working, and you're going to have to do some math. And I'll tell you, there are already decision modeling solutions out there at no charge available to employers. So if you've got some employees that you've got questions about, get a hold of Matt, get a hold of Beth, get a hold of myself, and we can help you work through the math here and understand the what-if scenarios, right? And I think the good news for those of you that look at this screen and gulp really hard is that we don't have to do the math just yet, right? But what I'll tell you is there's no way for employers to do the math if they don't have this 55 number, if they don't understand the hours that their employees are actually working. Okay, so our example, Bob makes the 40K but works 50 hours per week, $13.99 per hour. So again, to do this, you've got to identify the affected employees. Affected, not infected. Sorry, it's been a rough cold season here. Identify the affected employees, have an accurate view of the hours they work, and track their hours in an ongoing way in a system that you can pull reports out of. So Diversified and Paycor can help. So obviously there's some things that we can do to help you out. First of all, you've got to have access to the information. So build some reports to understand and manage the law effectively and proactively. You need to be able to track and manage your employees' hours, and you've got to be able to build updated policies and procedures for your employees. So we actually do at paycor.com/DOL already have an overtime calculator. It's available on the World Wide Web, right? And also you can access it via a mobile device. But if you want to do some sort of decision modeling, Diversified and Paycor already have solutions out there to help you understand the what-if scenarios. So before we get to questions, I want to quickly summarize. Let's go back here. The employees that are affected are ones that earn between $23,600 and $50,440 per year and are salaried. Those are the affected employees. This is a proposed law as of right now. It is Paycor, Diversified, and our council's opinion that this is not an if this law gets passed, it's a when this law gets passed. The when could be anywhere from July to October. We've heard rumblings that the $50,440 total could slide down a little bit, right? Maybe it goes down to $45,000 and that eliminates you from having to comply with this because you don't have anybody in that scenario. But understand who the affected employees are. Start tracking their hours right now. Sit down with your salaried employees. Let them know that because of this proposed overtime change, you need to understand the hours that that employee is working, and that conceivably in 6 months there might be a decision about how you compensate that employee so that you stay legal and that you comply with Department of Labor regulations. Understand that you can and you will get caught for skirting the law here. I just read an article about a local restaurant in Benton Harbor, Michigan, that was paying employees less than minimum wage and keeping employee tips. And that sounds really egregious, and it is. And they did it for years and got caught, right? And now that company is in deep, deep trouble with the Department of Labor. The people that you have to worry about are your employees, right? The government is asking them through varied ways and means to report if you as the employer are complying with Department of Labor regulations, that you're paying them fairly. So employees will tell on you, right? Ex-employees go to file an unemployment claim. That could trigger an audit into your business, and you can get nailed that way. The penalties for non-compliance are always so much more costly than actually complying. So understand the affected employees, understand the hours that they have to work, have a conversation with them about punching in and punching out, and then use the data to make one of 4 decisions. Either do nothing and pay that person time and a half. You can do you can adjust the employees to an hourly rate so that it's effectively cost neutral. They're still $40,000 a year, but you have to have a conversation with that salaried employee that they're now going to be an hourly employee. That's going to have some sort of cause and effect. You can bump up your affected employee salaries to $50,440, or you can manage or mandate that there is no overtime and just manage the heck out of it. But again, this is not just touching payroll. This touches your recruiting. This touches your HR. It touches time and attendance, and then finally your payroll and your reporting. So Matt, that's my without taking a breath speech. Before we get to the questions, I'll hit a couple other things here real quick. There are some groups of employees that are not affected by this update. So non-exempt employees, so those that are hourly, they're not affected by this update, right? You're already paying them, or you should be. You're already paying them time and a half. Commissioned sales employees, doesn't matter. Outside sales employees, doesn't affect them. Computer professionals, this is one of those like long-time IRS rules about computer professionals, but provides the FSLA provides that certain skilled computer professionals who are paid at least $27.63 per hour are exempt from overtime provisions. And then drivers, helpers, loaders, and mechanics are exempt from overtime pay if they're employed by a motor carrier. Again, let's talk about the penalties. If you're audited, it's typically 1.5 times the hours worked above 40 and then double it. You're more than likely going to have to pay your attorney, and you're probably going to have to pay the employee's attorney, right? The burden of proof, for those of you that have ever been through state unemployment claim or wrongful termination claim, or any sort of DOL audit, you're typically guilty until proven innocent. So the burden of proof lies on you, not the employee. And these penalties, they can go back anywhere from 3 to 5 years. So everybody that's on this call today, you're on this call for a reason, to learn about this and do it the right way. So I have no concerns about you guys, but your neighbors that don't take the time to learn about this, that do this incorrectly for 3 years, they could face 3 years worth of this 1.5 times above 40 doubled. So Matt, I'm right about 40 minutes. Want to give you guys some time for questions, and I think one of the things that Matt and I talked about was, if there's a question that I don't know the answer to, which I guarantee will happen, we'll do a little bit of research for the group and get an email document back out to the group with some questions answered. So Matt, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, David, and thanks for all the information. Very, very insightful. We do have a number of questions here, and And so I'll kind of just go through some of them with you here, David, that seem to be numerous people sending them in. You just touched base on commissioned individuals. Is there an impact there, David? Let's say the individual has some type of base salary and gets commissions on top of that. Is it a universal? If there's any commissions involved, they're not included, or do you know how that would work if they are?
Yeah, they're
combo.
Yeah, I think I don't think it matters if they're base plus commission. I think the fact that they're commissioned is what makes them exempt from this rule. There are some IRS regulations about how much commission people have to minimally obtain to be considered a commissioned salesperson. So I can take a look into that and figure out what that minimum amount is. But if they're a commissioned salesperson as of right now, they have made no distinction between base and salary. I'm sorry, base and commission or just straight commission. So if they're a commissioned salesperson, they're exempt from this.
Perfect. There's a couple of questions that came up regarding, if you could kind of touch base maybe on, at what point in time does that, become overtime? Is that, okay, it's Monday at 9 hours, but then I only work 7 hours on Tuesday? Can you touch base maybe on that a little bit?
Yeah, great question. I should have brought that up, so thank you for whoever asked that. That tends to vary based on the state that your employees work in. So here in Illinois, it's over 40 hours per week. So, the example I always give is if you paid an employee every 2 weeks over a 2-week pay period, and they worked 60 hours, and 60 of those hours were in week 1, well, that's 40 hours at their current rate and 20 hours at time and a half. So in Illinois, the day doesn't matter, but the week does. If they work more than 40 hours in a week, you are required to pay them overtime. Now, I know I've worked with some clients in San Francisco, and I grew up in California, so I'm allowed to say that California is crazy. And in the city of San Francisco, if you work more than 8 hours that day, it's overtime that day. So I could work 9 hours a week in San Francisco, but if all 9 hours were in one day, I'm 8 hours at straight time and then 1 hour at time and a half. So I would say you've got to do a little bit of research based on the state that employee works within as far as overtime.
Sounds great. One of the questions that came up a couple of times, and I don't know if it's if you know the answer to this one actually, but it came up regarding teachers and schools.
Yeah.
Obviously, a lot of teachers that don't necessarily work, they're off during the summer, but certainly in that salary range. Different, any exemptions or anything different for teachers and schools?
I have not seen that yet. That's a very good question. I don't know if they've come out with that yet. And typically, when things like this roll out, even I keep going back to the ACA because that's the thing that everybody's really kind of stuck in right now. Typically, the legislators in their infinite wisdom come out with this decision, and then everybody starts raising their hand and saying, well, what about this scenario, and have you thought about this? And they haven't. So I haven't seen anything on schools. I haven't seen anything on whether municipalities or government entities are exempt from this rule. Traditionally, they are not. But I haven't heard that yet. I'll see if I can find something on that, but I really have not heard anything about that just yet.
Sounds great.
Very fair question.
I know we're coming up on time. I do want to ask you one more question, David, but I just did want to touch base and I want to remind everyone that we have recorded this presentation, so we will be sending this out to all of you as attendees within the next couple of days. And also, we're not going to be able to get to all the questions. There are a number of others out there, but we will, as David mentioned earlier, we'll put together kind of a Q&A document, and between Beth and myself, and David will work to help answer some of those questions that we maybe can't get to right now. But the last question I want to leave with, since several individuals asked this, is maybe if you can touch on, salaried employee, but they're part-time. Maybe they're working 25 hours a week and they're salaried, or 32, whatever you want to call it. Anything to look out for there, or really just concern about the threshold of that 40 then, I would assume?
Yeah, I would just look at the 40. So, I think what we have to be very careful of is, and the ACA taught us this, is that that your definitions of part-time or full-time don't really matter to the government, right? So the full-time equivalent is what matters from an ACA standpoint. And so if you consider somebody part-time, regardless of the hours that they work, part-time designation, full-time designation doesn't really matter. What matters is that 40-hour threshold. As soon as that person crosses 40 hours in a work week, if they are salaried, right, forget about the part-time or full-time. If they're salaried and they work more than 40 hours, then you've got to pay them time and a half for those hours. So the part-time, full-time thing, I could see why that would be confusing. I just think don't even include that stuff in this mix. Just look at the hours that the person's working. By definition, if somebody's part-time, they're not working 40 hours or more. But you might want to understand that a little bit. I know I'm friends with an HR director here in Downers Grove, and she's quote-unquote part-time, but the business need is driving it. She's actually working about 48 hours per week at this business. So I think that's the more important thing to look at, is don't look at the label, but look at the actual hours that they're working. And you might be surprised to find that some of your, again, quote-unquote part-time people are working full-time quite simply, and maybe even overtime, because that's what the job demands.
That's a great point, and I agree, especially with ACA. We've obviously doing a lot of analysis on that. It's surprising sometimes how many hours people are actually working.
Yeah.
Well, as you can see on the slide here, last slide, please, by all means, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Again, thank you, everyone, for your time and attention today. We appreciate it. We certainly will do our best to keep you up to speed as this goes along, and depending on what may change or not change for that matter, maybe it goes through the way it is, we'll certainly keep you up to speed with those regulations and look to do potentially additional webinars as the year comes along. But I just thank you, David. I appreciate your time and your great presentation here today. It was very informative, hopefully, for everybody on the phone call. And with that, we're going to end our webinar today. Thanks, everyone, for your time, and thanks again, David, for putting all your work.
No problem. Thanks, guys. Have a great rest of your day.